What is up, guys? Tyson Dela Cruz here. Thank you so much for rocking with me. This video, we are going to listen to Jerome Powell's speech, inflation, and all that good, juicy stuff. But before we begin, as always, you got to drink the cafe. And cheers. This is a press conference following a 2-day meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee on interest rate policies in Washington in the U.S. The Federal Reserve have held interest rates steady at their current range of 5.25 to 5.5, but revised its outlook for rate cuts to just one time in 2024. I don't know if you guys remember, but at the end of last year, at the beginning of the year, this year, they were talking about 6 rate cuts, and now they are talking about one. I think that one's going to turn to maybe none, especially because we have elections coming up. But the central bank policy noted that there has been modest, fair progression towards its 2% inflation objective. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell will provide additional context in the video that we're going to watch. Federal Reserve kept a steady hand on interest rates, but it's calling for just one rate cut in 2024. Let's go ahead and jump in the video and hear what Mr. Jerome Powell has to say. And I'd love to get your guys' thoughts. Let's dive right in.
Today, the FOMC decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged and to continue to reduce our securities holdings.
Interesting.
We are maintaining our restrictive stance of monetary policy in order to keep demand in line with supply and reduce inflationary pressures. I'll have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments. Recent indicators suggest that economic activity has continued to expand at a solid pace. Although GDP growth moderated from 3.4% in the fourth quarter of last year to 1.3% in the first quarter, private domestic final purchases, which excludes inventory investment, government spending, and net exports, and usually sends a clearer signal on underlying demand, grew at 2.8% in the first quarter, nearly as strong as the second half of 2023. Growth of consumer spending has slowed from last year's robust pace, but remains solid. And investment in equipment and intangibles has picked up from its anemic pace last year. Improving supply conditions have supported resilient demand and the strong performance of the U.S. economy over the past year. In our summary of economic projections, committee participants generally expect GDP growth to slow from last year's pace, with a median projection of 2.1% this year and 2.0% over the next 2 years. In the labor market, supply and demand conditions have come into better balance. Payroll job gains averaged 218,000 jobs per month in April and May, a pace that is still strong, but a bit below that seen in the first quarter. The unemployment rate ticked up, but remains low at 4%. Strong job creation over the past couple of years has been accompanied by an increase in the supply of workers, reflecting increases in participation among individuals aged 25 to 54 years and a continued strong pace of immigration. Nominal wage growth has eased over the past year, and the jobs to workers gap has narrowed. Overall, a broad set of indicators suggests that conditions in the labor market have returned to about where they stood on the eve of the pandemic. Relatively tight, but not overheated.
Relatively tight, yeah, for sure.
FOMC participants expect labor market strength to continue. The median unemployment rate projection in the SEP is 4.0% at the end of this year and 4.2% at the end of next year.
Okay.
Inflation has eased notably over the past 2 years, but remains above our longer run goal of 2%. Total PCE prices rose 2.7% over the 12 months ending in April. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 2.8%. The Consumer Price Index, which came out this morning and tends to run higher than the PCE price index, rose 3.3% over the 12 months ending in May, and the core CPI rose 3.4%. The inflation data received earlier this year were higher than expected, though more recent monthly readings have eased somewhat. Longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households and businesses and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. The median projection in the SEP for total PCE inflation is 2.6% this year, 2.3% next year, and 2.0% in 2026. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. Our monetary policy actions are guided by our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. In support of these goals, the committee decided at today's meeting to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 5.25% to 5.5%, and to continue reducing our securities holdings. As labor market tightness has eased and inflation has declined over the past year, the risks to achieving our employment and inflation goals have moved toward better balance. The economic outlook is uncertain, however, and we remain highly attentive to inflation risks. We've stated that we do not expect it will be appropriate to reduce the target range for the federal funds rate until we have gained greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably toward 2%. So far this year, the data have not given us that greater confidence. The most recent inflation readings have been more favorable than earlier in the year, however, and there has been modest further progress toward our inflation objective. We'll need to see more good data to bolster our confidence that inflation is moving sustainably toward 2%. We know that reducing policy restraint too soon or too much could result in a reversal of the progress that we've seen on inflation. At the same time, reducing policy restraint too late or too little could unduly weaken economic activity and employment. In considering any adjustments to the target range for the federal funds rate, the committee will carefully assess incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. In our SCP, FOMC participants wrote down their individual assessments of an appropriate path for the federal funds rate, based on what each participant judges to be the most likely scenario going forward. If the economy evolves as expected, the median participant projects that the appropriate level of the federal funds rate will be 5.1% at the end of this year, 4.1% at the end of 2025, and 3.1% at the end of 2026. But these projections are not a committee plan or any kind of a decision. As the economy evolves, assessments of the appropriate policy path will adjust in order to best promote our maximum employment and price stability goals. If the economy remains solid and inflation persists, we're prepared to maintain the current target range for the federal funds rate as long as appropriate. If the labor market were to weaken unexpectedly, or if inflation were to fall more quickly than anticipated, we're prepared to respond. Policy is well positioned to deal with the risks and uncertainties that we face in pursuing both sides of our dual mandate. We'll continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting, based on the totality of the data and its implications for the outlook and the balance of risks. The Fed has been assigned two goals for monetary policy: maximum employment and stable prices. We remain committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Restoring price stability is essential to achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the long run. Our success in delivering on these goals matters to all Americans. We understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve Leisman, CNBC. Just wondering if you could walk me through the committee's average inflation forecast. Core PCE is now forecast to be 2.8% by the year end. It's already 2.75, and after today's number, there were several forecasts on the street that it would be 2.6 at the end of this month. Does that tell you that the average official expects no further progress in inflation, and in fact that it's going to get worse? And if you have this wrong, doesn't it mean that you could have wrong the outlook for rates there?
Oh,
yeah. So what's going on there is that we had very low readings in the second half of last year, June through December, really. And we're now lapping those. So as you go through the 12-month window, a very low reading drops out and a new reading comes in. The new reading gets added to the 12-month window. So It's just a slight element of conservatism that we're assuming a certain level of incoming monthly PCE and core PCE numbers. We're assuming a good but not great numbers, and if you put that on top of where we are now, you get a very slight increase
Good,
in
not
the
great
12
numbers.
month reading. Now, do we have high confidence that that's right? No, it's just a kind of conservative way for forecasting things. If we were to get more readings like today's reading, then of course that wouldn't be the case. So it's just a forecasting device. I think.
Couple things that Powell said that I'd like to highlight. One of them is we do not expect it will be appropriate to reduce the target rate for the federal fund rate until we have gained greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainable towards 2%. It's just something to highlight here.
On a sustainable basis, and that's the test.
The other thing that I wanted to highlight on here too, that Mr. Powell has stated, we will need to see more good data to bolster our confidence that inflation is moving sustainable towards 2%. That means not incredibly confident on what's occurring. We will reduce interest rates once it appears that dominance is sustainable. It has a sustainable path to 60%. If the economy evolves as expected, the median participant projections that appropriate levels of FFR will be at 5.1% at the end of this year. Interesting.
2 or 3 more inflation readings like the one that we saw this morning make a September interest rate cut possible?
So as far as the SEP part of that is concerned, as you know, I talk to all of the other participants on the FOMC every cycle, and we talk about their summer of economic projections and the their dot plot and everything. And what I hear and see is that people are looking at a range of plausible outcomes, and in many cases they're thinking, I don't really, I can't really distinguish between two of these. They're so close for me. These are very close calls, but we ask them to write down the most likely one, so they do. And I think as you've said, there's 15 of the 19 are kind of clustered around one or two. So I think I would look at all. I look at all of them as plausible, but I look at I think that does tell you kind of what the committee thinks. But what everyone agrees on is it's going to be data dependent. No one brings to this or takes away from it that is on the committee a really strong commitment to a particular rate path. It's actually just their forecast, and it's a combination of their forecast and their own reaction function. But again, everyone would say that this is very data dependent, and I don't hold it with high confidence. And I think
interesting here. It looks like the Fed has reconsidered they reconsidered the number of rate cuts for this year. The last summary of economic projections back in March showed a median number of cuts to be 3. But the one that just came out in June shows only 1 potential rate cut by the end of the year. Honestly, I don't think that will even happen. Back to this.
if you're looking for and don't really think that they're not trying to send a strong signal that this is what I think is the right thing. It's just what they think at a given moment in time, subject to data. In terms of future meetings, we haven't. We don't make decisions about future meetings until we get there. I think in terms of what we need to see, I mentioned it earlier, we want to gain further confidence. Certainly more good inflation readings will help with that. I'm not going to be specific about how many, because really it's going to be not just the inflation readings, it's going to be the totality of the data. What's happening in the labor market, what's happening with the balance of risks, what's happening with the forecast, what's happening with growth. You look at all of that, and you ask, are we confident? Have we reached an appropriate level of confidence that inflation is moving down sustainably to 2%? Or alternatively, do we see really unexpected signs of weakness in the labor market that would call for a response? Which is another thing that could happen. But again, we don't see that, and we see today's report as as progress and as, building confidence, but we don't see ourselves as having the confidence that would warrant, beginning to loosen policy at this time.
And if I could quickly follow up, did you or any of your colleagues change your interest rate projections after 8:30 or whenever you got the inflation numbers today?
So this happens too often, but it does happen. It just is, data came, I think it happened a few meetings ago. So when that happens, when there's an important data print during the meeting, first day or second day, what we do is we make sure people remember that they have the ability to update. We tell them how to do that. And some people do, some people don't, most people don't. And I'm not going to get into the specifics, but you have the ability to do that so that, what's in the SEP actually does reflect the data that we got today, to the extent you can, reflect it in one day. I think we'll see PPI tomorrow. We'll know more about the PCE reading as the month goes on, but the initial CPI reading and its, kind of first level translation to PCE, we did have this morning. We were briefed about it, and people were able to consider whether they should make changes. And as I said, some people generally do, but most people generally don't.
I think that's good there. I'd love to get you guys' thoughts on this. I'm going to post the rest of this video down below. So you guys can check it out on your own. But it's very interesting concept. I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on economic standings, specifically after the remarks from Mr. Powell. Other than that, guys, I'll see you on the next one.